Welcome back everybody to part 8 of our Starfox style rail shooter series in Unity. In the last video, we set up our crosshair UI, which means we're now clear to go ahead and create our lock-on charge shot for the ship. So, when you're ready, you can also lock on the enemies this way. Let's crack on. For the charge shot, there's a few things we want to prepare beforehand. I've gone ahead and prepared these for you, but if you want to create your own, what you'll need is, if you open up the prefabs folder and open up weapons, you'll need to use a particle emitter to create some form of charge shot effect. If you double click and open up the charge shot prefab, you'll see that we have the particle system here for this glowing orb and a child particle system for the sparks. You can create whatever type you like, but for now, if you don't have one, you can go ahead and use the one provided. And we're going to use this not only for the charge shot, but also the charge effect. When we hold down the button to charge, we want that orb to swell and grow to look like we're charging something powerful. So let's create the charge weapon by simply selecting our single weapon, Ctrl D to duplicate, rename it whatever you like. I renamed to charge weapon. Inside, you can leave this if you wish. The laser pool is optional. If you want to use that, go ahead. But for simplicity, I'm going to go ahead and delete. Instead, what we want to do is drag that charge shot prefab as a child of the charge weapon. Right click it, hit prefab, and select unpack completely. That way, it is no longer tied to the prefab, so we can make some changes if we wish. For a starter, we want to make sure we've reset the position on X, Y, and Z to 0, so it's at the center of the ship. Let's rename this as well to charge effect. There we are. And we want to place this now at the same position as the fire point, so holding down Control, simply drag it to the same center location like so. And that's all we need for the charge weapon setup for now. Next, we want to write two different scripts, a charge weapon controller script and a script that's going to scale up this charge effect from a minimum and maximum value. So let's start off with that. Go to the scripts folder and create a scale over time script, drag it onto the charge effect and open it up. Okay, for the variables, we want to have a public float scale speed, how fast we want to scale the object between a minimum and maximum value, which will be the second floats below, public float, minimum scale, and maximum scale. We're going to use these to affect the vector-free scale of the charge effect object, and that's all we need for the variables. Next, let's go into Update and use these variables to set the vector-free scale on X, Y, and Z. We'll say that the scale will equal a new vector-free. Inside, we're going to start with the X value, the X axis, and we're going to clamp the minimum and maximum scale using mathf.clamp. So for the first line, for the scale on X, mathf.clamp, inside the brackets, the scale.x will plus equal the scale speed by those clamped minimum and maximum scales. We'll then repeat that line of code underneath, except we're just going to change the scale to Y, scale.y, and the last one, scale.z. That's all we need to scale the object. Then lastly, we want to set that new scale. Therefore, the transform.local scale of the object will equal that new scaled vector-free scale. Now that we can scale the object between the minimum and maximum value, how do we want this to work when we charge? When we hold down the button to charge, we want to scale the object up. When we release, we want to reset the scale back to its minimum default scale. For that, we're going to use on enable and on disable. Similar to awake and start, on enable is called when the object is set active. So when we hold down the button, we're going to set active that charge effect. When we release, on disable is called, we're going to set that object inactive and reset the value back to its default scale. So you can go ahead and delete start, we won't be needing that. And in on enable, we're going to set the scale. So the scale, when we set the object active, will equal its current transform.local scale. Then it will scale up from update. And when we disable the object, we want to reset its scale back to default. And in Unity, the default scale of objects is 1. So we'll set in on disable transform.localScale will equal, and we'll set a new vector 3, and on X, Y, and Z, the value of 1 on each axis. That'll reset it back to its default scale. And that's all we need for scaling the object. Let's hit save. Next, let's move on to creating a charge shot script to be attached to our charge shot prefabs that we want to shoot from the charge weapon. So go ahead, create and open up a charge shot script. The charge shot will be just like the laser script, except this time we don't need to apply a speed to it. We'll apply the speed to the prefab via the charge weapon script. So for the variables, we want to have a public integer for the shot damage. When the prefab has made contact with the enemy or a surface, we want it to instantiate a public game object, charge blast. This will be an explosion object that we'll create in a moment that will scale up and deal damage to any enemies that get caught in its radius, just like that in Starfox. We also want to have a public rigid body to apply the speed to through the charge weapon script, and that's why it will be public. And we only want to be able to fire one charge shot at a time, not repeatedly. And for that, we're going to use a system action called destroyed. System actions are notifications that other scripts can listen out for in order to know that the coast is clear to then go ahead and execute an action or a function. So in this case, we're going to charge, release, shoot the shot, and we cannot charge and fire another charge shot until that prefab has been destroyed. So we can only shoot one at a time. And this will all be called, of course, in a private void on trigger enter collider other. Here we want to say that if the prefab collides with any object, enemy, ground, environment, whatever, we first want to invoke that system action. So we'll start off by saying if the destroyed action does not equal null, then destroyed.invoke, call that action, which lets us know that we can then charge again. We also want to deal damage if that object is on the enemy layer. We'll state that if the other.gameObject.layer is equal to 10 in this project, the enemy layer is the 10th layer in the dropdown. Then we want to deal damage to the enemy health scripts that we'll create soon. So other.gameObject.getComponent, enemy health, then we'll call on the damage enemy function and apply that shot damage. We also want to instantiate that charge blast explosion at the transform position and rotation of the prefab, and then finally destroy the game object. That's all we need for the charge shot itself. Now let's move on, create and open up a charge weapon script. Okay, so for the variables, and there will be quite a few, we'll start off with the usual weapon script there. That will be a public transform the fire point. We'll also have a public charge shot the charge prefab. We'll attach the charge shot script to the charge prefab we want to instantiate. We'll also have a public game object for that charge effect that's going to grow and expand and look really cool. We also want to apply a speed to that prefab. Below, public float shot speed. And we want this weapon to lock on to an enemy object. Therefore, we'll have a public transform for the enemy transform called lock target. How do we determine if an object is an enemy? We'll use a layer mask, the enemy layer. So below, create a serialized field layer mask called layer mask or enemy mask if you prefer. We also want to control how often we can use this weapon because it is quite powerful, and we only want to be able to charge and release a single charge shot at a time. Once that hit its target, we can then reset and charge again. So we'll have a public bool reloading and a public bool target locked. And then below we'll have 3 serialized floats. The first one, a serialized float for the charge time, how long we've been charging. Then we'll have 2 more floats to control the minimum time it takes to charge and how long it takes for the charge to be active. So we'll have a minimum charge time and a charge activation time. Once we've locked on to the target, we want to change the color of the reticule that we created earlier. We want a public reference image to the reticule, and we'll have a serialized color below called the normal color, which will be its default color we'll resort back to once we've finished locking on. And that's it for the variables. With everything in place, let's work from the bottom up scroll all the way down, create a function called target lock-on. Inside, we'll use a ray cast. We'll have a ray named ray, and that'll equal a new ray at the fire point dot position being shot at the fire point dot forward vector direction. Whatever object we hit, we want to get the information from it, such as its transform for the locked target transform. And to do that, we can create a container to store that information. That'll be the raycast hit, named hit. If you want to visualize the raycast in the engine, you can have a debug.drawRay from the fire point position, transform.forward at a float distance of 100, and you can give it a color.red. Then below, we want to say if, inside the brackets, physics.raycast, inside a second set of brackets here, that the ray has out-hit something at a distance of a float 100, and it's hit something on the layer mask, being the enemy layer, then what do we want to do? We want to get the locked target transform, will equal that hit object.transform. Therefore, once we've done, target locked equals true, and we'll change the reticule color. Reticule.color equals color.red. And you can add some debugs for good measure, just to confirm that you've hit locked onto the enemy target, and you can change the draw ray to green if you like. And that's all we need for the target lock-on function. Next, above, let's create a function called charge reset. This is going to reset the timer and charge effect once we've finished shooting. When we start charging, the charge time will increase. All we want to do is set charge time to 0, reset it back to 0, set the charge effect.setActive false, and reset the reticule color to its normal color, which we'll set in start. So if you go up to start and simply input that the normal color will equal the reticule's color at the start of the frame. Now let's scroll back down, and above charge reset, let's just create a public method shot armed. This is going to help control whether we can or can't use the charge shot, and we'll call this via a system action in a moment. For now, inside, we just want to say if the shot is armed or not, that reloading equals false, and target locked also equals false. Then let's go up and create a function charge shoot. Inside charge shoot, we want to first say that we can only shoot if we're not reloading. We'll start with an if statement. If we're not reloading, then we'll instantiate a prefab shot from that charge shot, instantiate charge prefab from the firepoint.position and the firepoint.rotation. The direction of the shot will be determined whether we're locked onto a target or not. If target locked, then we'll create a vector-free direction that will equal the locked target.position minus the transform.position of that instantiated shot dot normalized, meaning that this will follow the target direction. And we want to apply that direction to the shot rigid body. Shot.rb.linear velocity equals that new direction multiplied by the shot speed. If we're not locked on, then we want the charge shot to shoot forward just like a normal laser weapon. Therefore, shot.rb.linear velocity equals firepoint.forward multiplied by shot speed. After that, we'll then call that system action that we created in the charge shot here destroyed. So we want to call upon that system action. Therefore, the shot.destroyed plus equals shot armed, and reloading will then equal true. That's all we need for charge shooting. Now that we've gone ahead and prepared those methods, we can now move up and create a charge input function. Inside, we'll say that if input.get mouse button down 0, the left mouse button, then charge time will plus equal time.delta time. We'll create an if statement that says if the charge time is greater than the charge activation time, then the charge effect.setActive equals true. Below, we'll create a second if function that says if the charge time is greater or equal to the minimum charge time, Then we'll lock on to the target, call upon that target lock-on function. Now we want two other things to happen if we release the charge shoot button, if input.getMouseButton up 0, and we released it with the charge time greater or equal to the minimum charge time, then we want to call on the charge shoot and reset the charge. We've successfully shot. While we're holding down, we're charging. When we release the shot. Else, if we release the button, input.getMouseButton up 0, and the charge time was less than the minimum charge time, then reset the charge. We didn't hold it down long enough, and we can't release a charge shot. Then, finally, in update, let's simply put in our charge input function, hit save, and let's head back into Unity. Once everything has compiled, select your charge weapon and delete the single weapon controller that's left over from when we duplicated it. Go to the scripts folder, weapons, and drag in your charge weapon script. Let's start filling it out. Let's put the fire point in there and the charge effect in there like so. Next, it's asking for the charge prefab. Let's talk about that for a moment. Go to the prefabs folder, weapons, and you'll see we have a charge blast and a charge shot. Let's open up the charge shot. Our charge shot requires a little setup. Make sure it has a rigid body and a sphere collider set to trigger. We also want to drag from the scripts weapon folder that charge shot script. Let's give it a shot damage of 50, and it's asking for a charge blast. This will be the explosion that will scale up and expand out on contact with the enemy or surface. We'll cover that in the next video, where we look at how to create the smart bomb system and the explosions that go with it. So for now, in the weapon prefabs folder, simply drag and drop the charge blast in there like so. For the rigid body, just drag and drop it in there nice and easy. Then I think it will be nice if we have this scale up for added effect. In the scripts folder, simply drag in the scale over time script, and let's give it some values. Let's give it a scale speed of 5, minimum scale of 0.1, and a maximum scale of 2. Then let's head back into the scene. Let's drag and drop the charge shot prefab in the slot like so, and give it a shot speed of around 20, not too fast, but not too slow, so we can see what's going on. The lock target will happen when we hit an object on the enemy layer, which will be on that layer mask. Select the drop down, select your enemy layer, create it if you need to. Reloading and target locked feedback for us, so we know it works. And let's tinker with the charge time and minimum charge time. Charge time will be set to 0, minimum charge time of 1 second, and a charge activation of 0.1 should do the trick. Then it's asking for the reticule. Let's go to the HUD manager, the canvas, and drag our reticle image in there like so. And the normal color is the default color, so we'll leave that as it is. And finally, before we place a dummy enemy in our scene, let's set up the charge effect. It's asking again for minimum scale, max scale, scale speed. Let's start with a scale speed of 10, min scale of 0.1, just like the charge shot, and a max scale of 2. Now those are all the systems in place, so let's set the charge effect inactive, and let's drag an enemy prefab into the scene. Select the prefabs folder, enemy. You can choose whichever one you like, but let's go with enemy A, and drag it in the enemies folder. Reset its position. The scale is fine, we can leave that as it is. The Z, let's set it at a distance of 50, so it's far from the player, and let's just zoom out and adjust the camera so we can see. There we go. Make sure that the enemy you're using is on your enemy layer and has the tag of enemy. If it doesn't have the enemy layer, then the lock-on will not work. Now, let's give this a test. Now, when we hold down and we fly within range, we've locked on. If I move out the way, you can see that it homes in on the enemy's location, but it doesn't explode or do damage because we haven't got that set up yet. But we will in the next video, where we're going to look at explosions, dealing damage to the enemy, and creating a smart bomb with a trigger system so you can detonate it after launch. Thank you all very much for watching, guys. I appreciate every single one of you. Your comments really encourage us to continue with these videos and these tutorials. And we'll see you in the next one. Take care.